Hello, my name is Lydia. At a family dinner, my sister called my phone a cheap knockoff, then smashed it on my plate while everyone laughed. They said it was just a joke. But when I stopped paying for their kids' tuition, their vacations, their second mortgages, suddenly I wasn't so funny anymore. For years, I played the role, the quiet one, the giver, the woman who always showed up with a check and never with demands, until the day I decided to stop funding my own erasure. What happens when the family ATM finally closes? What happens when silence turns into strategy? Would you still laugh if the person you depended on suddenly handed you the final invoice? I arrived 13 minutes late. Not that anyone noticed. The front door was slightly ajar when I pulled up to Callista's house, tucked perfectly into a cul-de-sac in Bellevue, where every lawn was manicured, every wreath seasonally accurate. I held the lemon tart with both hands, careful not to tilt the box. It was the same recipe Dad used to love, still warm, still mine. Inside, the sounds of clinking silverware and shallow laughter greeted me like a slap. I slipped through the entryway quietly, but it didn't matter. No one paused, no one stood up, no one asked how traffic was. Imelda glanced at me from across the dining room, as if I were the UPS driver dropping off a forgotten package. "Sit next to Odessa," she called over her shoulder, wiping her hands on a napkin. "There's space near the end." I glanced at the seat. Far from the head of the table, isolated, with a mismatched chair that had clearly been pulled in last minute. Odessa was scrolling on her phone, chewing with her mouth open. "Hi, sweetheart," I offered. She didn't look up. "Hey." I placed the tart on the counter. No one asked what it was. Callista was radiant, of course. Her hair perfectly blown out, lips tinted a precise shade of effortless perfection. She wore a blouse I'd seen featured in a Nordstrom ad and spoke like someone who always had an audience. "We were just talking about Odessa's application," she said to no one in particular, but loud enough for me to catch. "Berkeley seems likely. I mean, they practically recruit her kind." "Her kind? Meaning what, exactly?" Desmond chuckled. "You're raising a rock star, babe." Of course he said babe. He always did when he was trying to sound supportive in public. Dinner was some lemon-scented roast, ironic. As plates passed, hands reached over mine without excuse or acknowledgement. Every time I tried to join the conversation, it shifted like oil slipping from water. Then came the moment. I glanced at my phone. One new email. I only cracked the screen on for a second to check the sender. Callista caught it. Of course she did. She tilted her head, lips curving into that trademark smirk, equal parts charm and condescension. "Is that the knockoff version of the 17 Pro?" It wasn't even clever, but everyone laughed, loudly. The kind of laughter that echoes off marble countertops and bruises a person quietly. Odessa giggled and whispered something to Desmond. He repeated it louder. "She can buy another 10, right? That's what she's for." A pause. My hand gripped the phone tighter, thumb still resting on the home button. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I sat there like someone used to swallowing things whole. "Honestly," Callista went on, "you should try the Android next time. At least then it wouldn't pretend to be high-end." Odessa reached over, curious now, like some cruel instinct had been awakened. "Let me see it," she said. Before I could react, she had it. A 12-year-old with French-tipped nails and a twisted sense of inherited entitlement. "It doesn't even feel real," she said, mimicking her mother's cadence almost perfectly. Then she bent it. The sound was subtle, more of a crack than a snap, but it was final. The screen split from the corner. A delicate web of fractures crawled across the surface like ice on a lake. It slipped from her hand, landed on my plate, right on top of the roast. No one gasped. Callista looked amused. Desmond, he actually chuckled. "Whoops, guess that one's toast too." I looked around the table. Not a single person looked ashamed. Not one apology, just Callista sipping her wine, Odessa still grinning, and Imelda already passing the salt. I picked up the phone slowly, glass edges biting into my fingers. I wrapped it in my cloth napkin like it was something precious or dead. "Enjoy dinner," I said. It was quiet. Too quiet. And I think maybe that scared them more than if I had screamed. I didn't. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I took a sip of my wine, put my fork down gently, and let the silence expand like fog across the table. They resumed eating. The sound of chewing was louder than usual, or maybe I just noticed it more. For the rest of the meal, I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I watched. I listened. I recorded. Not on my phone, but in my head. Every laugh, every lack of defense, every insult handed to me with a fork. When dessert was served, store-bought cake from a local bakery, not the tart I brought, nobody even looked at the counter, as if what I brought never existed. And that's when it hit me. I'd been coming here for years, offering, giving, biting my tongue, and still, I was always the seat at the edge, the placeholder, the silence nobody respected. I knew then, in that split second of glass and laughter, I would never sit quietly again. I didn't remember driving home. The streets blurred into themselves, headlights blinking past like judgmental eyes. At some point, I must have taken the freeway instead of the back roads because I pulled into my building's garage faster than usual. Or maybe I just wanted to be anywhere but there. Inside my condo, the air was still. Not silent exactly, but still. The kind of stillness that waits, holding its breath. I set the dessert down on the counter. The box was a little smudged from my grip. No one had touched it. I didn't turn on the lights. The city glow poured in through the blinds, enough to see by. I walked past the kitchen, heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and placed my purse gently on the entry bench. Then, with deliberate care, I pulled the napkin from my bag. The phone was still wrapped like something sacred. I carried it to my desk and unwrapped it slowly. The screen was spider-webbed with fractures, and a sliver of glass had split clean through the top corner. I could still see the faint reflection of the chandelier from Callista's dining room frozen on its surface. I placed it in the center of my desk, like an exhibit, like a relic, something that had once belonged to me but had been taken, violated, and returned broken. My laptop sat beside it. I opened it. The screen glowed, blinking softly, as if waiting for something meaningful to begin. I placed my hands on the keyboard, fingers poised, but I typed nothing. I just stared, not at the screen, but at the words that looped in my mind, uninvited, but loud. That's what she's for. Desmond had said it so casually, like it was a running joke, like I wasn't sitting right there, like I hadn't paid for the very wine he was sipping when he said it. That's what she's for. It echoed again. Not just his voice, but the laughter that followed. The way Odessa leaned into Callista, smirking like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Of course Aunt Lydia pays. Of course she brings the gifts, writes the checks, picks up the slack. Because what else is she good for? I don't remember the rest of the meal. I don't remember what was said, but I remember the silence, mine. It wasn't cowardice. It was containment. I rose from the chair and walked back into the kitchen. The tart sat untouched on the counter. I had wrapped it in parchment and tied it with twine like I always did, like Dad used to. It smelled like lemon and sugar and something I couldn't name, something that was mine. I opened the box. The crust was golden, the meringue peaks lightly toasted. They hadn't even looked at it. I took out a fork and ate it standing up, straight from the box, bite after bite, not out of hunger, just necessity. I chewed and swallowed and tried not to think about how many times I had done this, brought things no one wanted, offered sweetness where there was no space for it. I finished half before I set the fork down. It wasn't just about the tart. It never was. Back in my bedroom, I opened the top drawer of the nightstand. Buried under receipts and a faded holiday card from 3 years ago was a notebook I hadn't touched in a long time. Its cover was worn. The kind of notebook you buy when you think being organized might fix something. Across the front, in faint gold lettering, Family Finance. I flipped it open, item after item, grocery bills, birthday gifts, emergency braces for Odessa, plane tickets for Mom's birthday surprise trip, down payments for Desmond's car, tuition checks, $47,800. That number stared back at me like a dare. Not that I ever thought they owed me. That wasn't the point, but the fact that no one even acknowledged it. That was the point. The screen on my laptop had gone dark. I tapped the spacebar. Still nothing typed. My eyes returned to the phone on the desk. fractured, silent. That was me too, wasn't it? Useful, expensive, breakable. I closed the notebook and reached for a pen. On the inside cover, I wrote a sentence, just one. You are not just a function in their lives. The words came out shaky at first, but I rewrote them, this time with pressure. With ink that left grooves in the paper, then I wrote another. They don't get to keep borrowing your silence. The clock said 11:26 p.m. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. A couple laughed somewhere down the street. The world moved on, and so would I. I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it Receipts. One by one, I pulled up old emails, bank transfers, scanned invoices, anything with a date, a name, and a dollar sign. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I knew I'd need them, not for revenge, for clarity, for me. I wasn't planning to burn anything down. That's not who I am. But if I was going to stop being their unpaid insurance policy, I needed to be sure. Sure of what I gave, sure of what they took, sure of who I became when I stopped. It was 12:04 when I finally shut the laptop. I went to the kitchen, rinsed the fork, and put the rest of the tart into the fridge. Then I sat on the couch. In the quiet, I heard nothing. But in that silence, there was a kind of hum, a vibration, a knowing. They might laugh, but I'm the one holding the receipts, and soon the silence will end. The next morning, I stood in my closet, staring at rows of clothes I barely wore and boxes I hadn't touched in years. The tart was still in the fridge, wrapped and sealed, half-eaten and quietly waiting for a moment that would never come. The previous night clung to me, not like a wound, but more like a film I couldn't wash off. I hadn't slept much, just paced between the bedroom and kitchen, sipping lukewarm tea and flipping through receipts. And now, there I was, trying to convince myself that reorganizing a closet could somehow reorganize my mind. I started pulling down boxes. Some were labeled, holiday, dad's things, taxes, and others were blank, filled during moves and forgotten. One box, small and dusty, had a faint gold sticker on it that read, Ephraim's Photos. My fingers stopped moving. I hadn't looked through Dad's photo album since his funeral. That was nearly 9 years ago. He'd been the only person in our family who asked me real questions, who noticed when I changed my hair, who always cut me the first slice of cake, even when Callista pouted. I carried the box to the bed and sat down slowly. As I opened it, the scent of old paper and time hit me. Inside were 2 albums and a few loose prints. The first photo I picked up was from my 7th birthday. I remember the day clearly. Mom had made spaghetti, Callista got me a book she said I was too young to understand, and Dad had taken photos with his Polaroid. I was in a yellow dress. I remember because it was itchy and I had complained the whole afternoon. In the photo, Callista stood front and center, grinning wide, holding the birthday cake. My name was written in blue icing. Balloons floated behind her. To her right, Imelda held Odessa, just a baby at the time. Desmond was already in the picture by then, lurking in the back with his always-on husband face. And me? I was barely visible on the far left edge of the frame. Half a face, cut off at the shoulder. My mouth was open, as if I'd been mid-sentence or trying to get someone's attention. That picture had been mounted in Mom's hallway for years, and somehow I'd never noticed. It didn't feel accidental anymore. I flipped through more photos. The pattern repeated. Callista in the center, Callista cutting cakes, Callista opening gifts, me, always a blur at the edges, a hand reaching in, a shadow by the doorway. That weekend, I had planned to clean the house, to go to the farmer's market, to live like a woman who didn't just absorb her family's neglect for sport. But instead, I found myself scrolling through Callista's Facebook at midnight with the lights off. And there it was. A photo from our family vacation 6 months ago, the one I paid for in full. The Airbnb had been in my name. I'd covered 2 flights, rented the car, booked the boat tour that Callista later posted videos from as if they were hers. Her caption under the photo was neat, polished, and deceitful. Blessed to treat the family to something special. Nothing matters more than this. Gratitude. Family first. Heartful. I wasn't tagged. No mention of me. Not even a stray emoji. Just 38 comments praising her for being such a giver. One of her friends even wrote, "You're honestly the backbone of your family. Such an example." I read that one 3 times. Then I turned my phone off and walked to the kitchen, teeth clenched so tight my jaw hurt. On the fridge, the vacation magnet was still pinned next to a faded grocery list. I pulled it off and threw it into the trash. The next day, I opened my email and found the receipts, hotel confirmations, ticket bookings, Uber transactions, all in my name. I printed every one of them and filed them in a new folder. On the tab, I wrote in black Sharpie, "Receipts, not forgotten." It wasn't just about the money, it was about being erased. It was about Callista taking the trip I'd given them and turning it into her personal public relations campaign. It was about Desmond sitting on the patio that I paid for, calling me overly sensitive because I had asked for a quiet hour to work. It was about Imelda saying, "Let your sister shine a little." Every time I tried to say something meaningful, I didn't need a spotlight. I just didn't want to be a ghost. That night, I sat down at my desk again. The shattered phone still sat where I'd left it. I hadn't replaced it yet. Something about its fractured face felt symbolic, honest. Next to it, I opened a new journal. Clean pages, unused space. I titled it, "Not Just a Wallet." Then I wrote, "I was there, I paid, I mattered, and I will not be erased." The sentence came out clean. Sharp, like a thread finally pulled free. I kept writing. Not a letter, not a manifesto, just truth, line by line, what they took, what I gave, what I saw that no one else acknowledged. I didn't cry. I didn't feel hollow. I felt present. They thought I was just a shadow in the background, but shadows always know where the light really is. I had been filing receipts for days, the soft click of pages turning, becoming a metronome for something I hadn't named yet. The pile of printed confirmations and bank statements sat like a small, sensible altar on my kitchen table. I'd arranged them by date, by vendor, by who benefited. It felt ridiculous and necessary at once. Ridiculous because the numbers were mundane, necessary because the truth often sits inside dull paper. A week after I'd started that quiet ritual, Imelda called and asked me to come for Sunday brunch. Her voice had been syrupy, all warmth and old habit. She said there would be a little surprise. I told her I had plans. She said, "Nonsense. Family first." She knew the strings to pull. When I pulled up the driveway of Imelda's house, hedges shaped like commas and porch chairs lined up like a magazine spread. The air smelled faintly of lemon and old wood polish. Callista greeted me at the door with a hug that felt rehearsed. "You made it," she said, bright as if she were announcing an award. Behind her, the dining room looked like the landing page of someone's perfect life. Framed photos, brass candlesticks, a long book on the console that read, proudly, "The Marlowe Family Legacy." They had printed a book, a bound, glossy thing with ribbon markers, a gift for the generations. Imelda beamed, as if a legacy could smooth over the small holes they kept in our family fabric. "Open to the middle," she said, and everyone leaned forward like they were watching a stage trick. I flipped the pages dutifully, and that first pleasant flutter, pictures, captions, dates, slid into an odd rhythm. Weddings, graduations, snapshots of smiling grandparents. Callista pictured every other spread, headlined sections, testimonials, appreciation paragraphs she'd surely counseled into existence. Then I reached a page that should have been unremarkable. The family contributors list. Names, brief notes about roles, a tiny nod to who did what. My name appeared, but the spelling was wrong. Every single instance, a missing Y here, an extra vowel there. In one spot, the list described me as supporting role, administrative, as if I were a department, not a daughter. One caption next to a photo of a spring picnic used the phrase aid provider and then moved on to praise Callista for her leadership. I felt the breath leave my body in a small, controlled exhale. The room hummed. The napkins were starched. Nobody seemed to notice the deliberate downgrading of letters. Callista laughed and clapped lightly, praising Imelda. "Isn't this beautiful?" she said. "What a treasure. Mom, you did an incredible job." Imelda basked in it. She was so proud of the book she'd helped assemble, proud of the neat little story it told, one in which calluses were hidden, debts forgiven, and someone else always kept the script tidy. I leafed through, slower this time. Images of me, there, tucked into the margins, felt like scraps. My face, when visible, read as tertiary. My actions were footnotes. It was a subtle, cruel editorial decision to make me present and invisible simultaneously. Later, while coffee was being poured, Callista leaned over and nudged Odessa. "Say you're sorry to Aunt Lydia," she suggested, soft and managerial. Odessa rolled her eyes as she shuffled closer and offered the kind of apology children are taught to perform on cue. "Sorry I broke your phone," she muttered, voice flat. I looked at her and felt a cold amusement. "Are you sorry for breaking it?" I asked evenly, "or sorry for getting caught?" Her mouth twitched. It was the one moment when the child's practiced insolence slipped and something raw peeked through. Around us, there was the awkward pause, clock tick, spoon clink, like a held breath. Imelda's fingers tightened on her cup. Desmond looked at his shoes. Callista's smile narrowed. "Really?" she said, and the tone was a blade that had been dulled by years of rehearsal. "You're making something out of nothing." "No," I said. "You are." She answered with the same old line I'd heard before. "We all need to be the bigger person, Lydia. You always take the high road." The implication hung there. Can't you just let it go? But the way she said it was not an invitation. It was a verdict. We drifted through the rest of the meal like a current that had been redirected. People spoke in small, careful sentences. They complimented the quiche. They asked about my work in the way people ask when they want a safe topic to fill the air. In the hallway, away from the eyes and the plates, I saw Callista slip her phone into her clutch. "Can I have a word?" she asked, voice clipped. We stood in a narrow corridor lined with family photos and borrowed pride. Her posture was a study in controlled calm. She leaned in as if to share a secret. "You need to be careful," she said, whispering in that mother's eye voice. "You don't want to make waves. People talk, Lydia. You wouldn't want things to get messy for Odessa, would you?" Her hand rested on my arm. It should have been a comforting gesture. Instead, it felt like the light touch of a glove, performative, practiced. I let her set the terms for a heartbeat, then answered softly, "Keep erasing me, and I'll start writing my own version of events." She blinked as if surprised by my directness. "No one would believe you," she said, as if faithfulness of story depended on popularity and not truth. I looked hard at her. It felt necessary to be precise, because I'd spent years softening what I thought were my sharp edges. I had to show I'd been paying attention. "I'm not here to be believed," I said. "I'm here to end this." She laughed, the sort of sound that contains small, careful dismissals. "You're dramatic, Lydia. Don't make mountains out of molehills." Somewhere between the hallway and the living room, my patience thinned into something like resolve. The book had been a public erasure, a small, fashionable cruelty. The apology had been a show. Her whisper had been a threat masquerading as concern. They had assumed I would stay the dependable conduit for their comforts. They had not accounted for method. The afternoon sputtered on. Dessert, store-bought this time, arrived. A lemon cake, glossy and perfect. People took slices and complimented the baker. Conversations resumed, gentle and tidy, as if the earlier edges had been smoothed by small sweets and soft smiles. I stood and picked up my purse. "Are you staying for coffee?" Imelda asked, hopeful and weary. "No, thank you," I said. "I have to get some things done tonight." I didn't lie. The receipts needed attention. The folder that lived under my laptop had a new tab. It read, Phase 1, closed. The words felt ceremonial. I left without a scene. No dramatic door slam, no shouting. Imelda watched from her armchair with worry lining her face. Callista pretended not to look. She'd expect a tumble, a public unraveling. Instead, she watched precision. She watched quiet. That was the part that seemed to confuse her. How steady my calm could be, how little show I made of it. Back home, the city lights of Bellevue winked like indifferent witnesses. I made a pot of tea and sat at my kitchen table with the glossy family book open to the contributors page. I ran my finger along the misspelled letters and smiled, not in relief, but in clarity. They'd miswritten my name once more. They thought that small theft of attention was all I'd let them take. No one likes to be edited out of their own life. They presume silence is acceptance. They were wrong. They saw my silence as surrender. They forgot silence can also be strategy. 4 days slipped by like slow-moving ice. In the mornings, I still brewed coffee, still watered the plant on my windowsill, still answered polite work emails. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside my condo, though, everything was rearranged. My desk had become a quiet command center, piles of documents, screenshots printed in neat stacks, a mug of pens and highlighters. The folder named "The Cost of Being Quiet" sat open, its new tab blinking at me like a secret waiting to be deployed. I sat down that Thursday night and opened my banking app. The familiar list of automatic payments scrolled down the screen like a ledger of my servitude. Callista's tuition plan for Odessa's extracurricular academy, canceled. Desmond's gym fees, automatically deducted for family wellness, canceled. Imelda's shared family account, which had quietly crept up to cover everything from holiday flights to groceries, unlinked. Each click was small, almost trivial, but my hand stayed steady. With every confirmation notice, something inside me loosened, like a knot untying. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt methodical. It was the difference between slamming a door and locking it. One was emotional, the other was final. On the spreadsheet, I changed the tab's name from Family Support to Severance Executed. The keystrokes sounded louder than they should have. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The kitchen clock ticked. The city outside moved on, oblivious. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was refusal. A line drawn so quietly, it almost felt polite. That night I read a book until late. At 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up. Ronan's name blinked on the cracked screen. He rarely called me. I answered because some part of me still reflexively reached out for him. "Aunt Lydia?" His voice was uncertain. In the background, I could hear Callista talking sharply to someone. "Mom said the school card got declined. Can you fix it?" There it was, the first crack. "I'm sure your parents can," I said softly, keeping my voice calm. "It's their account." A pause. "But you always—" "I don't anymore, Ronan." I didn't add anything else. The line went silent. I heard muffled voices. Then he hung up. I stared at the phone, still cracked, still mine. My heart didn't race. It beat slow, even. I put it face down and returned to my book. In the morning, a text from Desmond waited on the screen. "Why would you do that?" I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my email and drafted a message to Odessa's school. "Dear administrator's name, effective immediately, please forward all future financial concerns to Callista, last name, and Desmond, last name. Lydia, last name, is no longer involved. Thank you." I attached the account number for reference. Then I took a screenshot of the sent email and dropped it into my documented disengagement folder. The cursor blinked. The air in my condo felt clean for the first time in years. When I sipped my coffee, it didn't taste bitter. It tasted like control. Hours later, an email from Imelda arrived. The subject line read, "Family meeting, Sunday?" The body of the message was polite, laced with the kind of tone only a mother could craft. "Can we meet this Sunday to talk as a family?" No mention of what about. No acknowledgement of the shift. Just the summons. I printed it out without answering and slid it into the folder marked Reactions, Phase 1. That was the name I'd given the next stage of my plan. Quiet, documented, unemotional. They'd always assumed my silence meant surrender. They had no idea it could also be strategy. After I filed the paper, I walked to the window. The city lights were a field of tiny eyes, watching without caring. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, clearer than it had in years. I thought about Dad, about how he used to tell me, Don't mistake patience for weakness. He'd been right. Patience can be preparation. I spent the rest of the night tidying the apartment, putting dishes away, folding laundry. Not because it needed doing, but because my body needed to know it still occupied space. In the background, my phone buzzed twice. Once from Callista, once from Desmond. I didn't open either message. Around 3 a.m., I shut off the lights and sat in the dark with a cup of tea. No drama, no speeches, just a quiet certainty settling into my bones. They didn't hear the click when I closed the door, but they'd feel the cold draft soon enough. The following Sunday came wrapped in the kind of gray drizzle only the Pacific Northwest can deliver. My condo smelled like brewed coffee and paper, folders stacked in quiet rows on my dining table. I hadn't answered Imelda's email, but I knew I'd be expected anyway. These family dinners were no longer invitations. They were summons. As I drove toward Callista's house, the windshield wipers beat a slow rhythm. I watched the suburban streets slide by, neat lawns, dripping mailboxes, American flags sagging in the damp air. My stomach didn't twist the way it used to before these gatherings. It sat still, waiting. Callista's driveway was full of cars. The front porch light was on even though it was daylight, casting a golden hue over the welcome mat that read, "Home Sweet Home." Inside, the smell of roasted chicken and polished wood greeted me. She'd gone to effort, fresh flowers on the console, candles flickering in the living room. Every detail screamed peace offering, but the air hummed with something else. Imelda rose from the sofa. "Lydia, sweetheart, thank you for coming." Her voice carried an edge I recognized, the edge of someone rehearsing lines. Callista swept in from the kitchen carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres like a hostess on a talk show. "We're just so glad you're here. It's been a rough week." Desmond hovered behind her, hands shoved into his pockets. Odessa sat at the far end of the table, fiddling with her phone, shoulders drawn in. She didn't meet my eyes. Everything about the scene felt staged. We sat down, plates passed, wine poured, polite chatter about the weather and traffic. My chair squeaked when I pulled it out. That small sound cut through the room sharper than any of their words. Halfway through the meal, Imelda cleared her throat. "We need to talk about Odessa's school," she said softly. I laid my fork down, waiting. Callista set her napkin on the table with a dramatic sigh. "They expelled her, Lydia. Do you understand? After all the work we've done to keep her there, after everything you've been part of, she's out, just like that." Desmond's voice snapped. "You knew this would happen." "Yes," I said calmly. "That was the point." The silence that followed wasn't shock, it was rage wrapped in disbelief. Callista's face flushed. "How could you let this happen? She's a child." "No," I said. "She's your child." My tone stayed even, measured. "And she's learning the same lesson you taught her. Someone else will always pay." Odessa's phone slipped from her hands and clattered onto the table. For a moment, she looked smaller, like a girl instead of a weapon. Desmond leaned forward, knuckles white. "We took you in, we supported you." "You used me," I interrupted, still calm. "And I allowed it. That ends now." The chicken cooled on the plates. No one touched the wine. Callista pushed back from the table. "Let's play a game," she said too brightly. "Something to lighten the mood, like old times." I almost laughed at the clumsy pivot, but I stayed. I wanted to see the performance through. She brought out a board game. Who's most likely to? A stack of cards, a circle of family, the illusion of togetherness. We went through a few rounds. Then Callista drew a card and read aloud, "Who's most likely to be taken advantage of the most?" Desmond smirked. "Oh, that's easy." Imelda looked down at her lap. Even Odessa, under her breath, muttered, "Aunt Lydia." One by one, they pointed at me. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping the hardwood. The sound filled the room like a blade unsheathing. "You don't need me," I said, my voice steady, low. "You never did. You just used me. And I allowed it. That ends now." Callista rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Lydia. Don't be dramatic." I stood. "You'll call it drama. I call it a boundary. No one spoke. Even the candles flickered as if caught off guard. I turned, walked to the door. No hugs, no goodbyes. The hallway smelled like her expensive perfume. My hand closed over the doorknob. I didn't slam it when I left. I wanted them to hear what silence finally sounds like. I spent the next 2 weeks watching them scramble. Not publicly, of course. Callista would rather be caught in last year's shoes than show panic in front of an audience. But I could see it in the digital traces they left behind. The subtle changes in captions, the abrupt silence that followed the usual cascade of curated perfection. Her Instagram had gone unusually quiet. That was my first clue. Then came the post. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was between client calls. I just brewed a fresh cup of coffee when my phone pinged. A notification from Facebook. Callista had posted photos from Odessa's graduation celebration. The first image was typical. Callista in a champagne-colored dress, Odessa beside her, all teeth and honor cords. Behind them, a tasteful balloon arch and one of those cursive signs that read, "Onward, Upward." But it was the caption that made the heat crawl up the back of my neck. Proud to gift Odessa this special piece for graduation. She's earned every bit. #GratefulMom, #FamilyMatters. There it was. The necklace. The same one I had researched for weeks, ordered from a local jeweler, and had engraved with Odessa's initials and a date in Roman numerals. Something she'd once told me she thought was timeless. I had wrapped it in a silver box and left it on the table at their house with a note. For every step you take, may you always remember who helped lift you. There was no mention of me in the post. Not a tag, not a word. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My coffee cooled beside me, untouched. I scrolled through the comments. "You're such a generous mom." "Odessa is so lucky to have you, Callista. You always go the extra mile." No one questioned it. Not one person paused to ask who really paid for that special piece. I didn't comment. I didn't message her. I just took a screenshot. Then I opened my phone's photo app and pulled up the receipt from the jeweler. I'd kept it. I'd kept everything. A few days later, another post surfaced. A group photo from a dinner at their house, what looked like a late celebration. Imelda was seated at the center, Desmond to her left, Callista on her right. Odessa grinned from behind the cake. Even Ronan was in the shot, holding a sparkling cider glass. Everyone was tagged, except me. But it wasn't just that I wasn't tagged. I wasn't in the photo. I recognized the tablecloth. I'd been at that dinner. I remembered the lemon cake because I had brought it and watched as no one mentioned it. They had cropped me out. Underneath the post was a caption, "Just the core crew." A friend had commented, "Is Lydia okay? Haven't seen her in a while." Callista replied, "She's busy these days." Busy, as if I were too occupied to show up. As if I hadn't been standing right there, handing them a cake, smiling through my clenched teeth. That night, I opened my laptop and uploaded 2 images to a new post. The first, a photo of the necklace receipt. The second, the original uncropped version of the family dinner, with me still visible, smiling faintly, holding the cake knife. No caption, just a single line. They say silence speaks volumes. Let's hope receipts do too. I clicked post. Then I closed the laptop and poured myself a glass of wine. It didn't take long. The comments started rolling in within the hour. Some from acquaintances, others from mutual friends. A few were neutral, didn't know that, but others were more pointed. Wait, didn't Callista say she bought that necklace? This photo is from the same dinner, right? Why crop someone out unless you have something to hide? By the next morning, the post had been shared 16 times. My inbox had a handful of unread messages, most of them containing quiet versions of, "Are you okay?" or "I had no idea." I didn't answer any of them. Imelda called twice. I let both go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Desmond texted once. "You made your point." Callista didn't post for 4 days. No new stories, no new quotes about family, no smiling brunch photos. I took screenshots of the silence. Labeled the folder, Echo Phase, Unraveling. And in my journal, I wrote, I wasn't trying to ruin them. I just stopped covering for them. The strange part? I didn't feel triumphant. There was no rush of power, no pulse of satisfaction. Just a steady calm, the kind you feel when something heavy is finally set down. I'd been the backdrop for so long, the support beam no one noticed unless it cracked. They built their image on my silence. Now let's see how well it holds under truth. By the time Imelda's voice came through the phone, I already knew what she wanted. "It's urgent," she'd said. "A family discussion. Everyone will be there." I could picture the scene before I even parked the car. Callista's curated living room, sunlight angling just so through the sheer curtains, a tray of hors d'oeuvres to make it feel like an invitation instead of an ambush. This time, I didn't dress like the helper. I wore a tailored navy dress, my hair pinned up, a thin envelope clutched in my bag like a blade wrapped in paper. Imelda's house smelled of polished wood and old perfume. The same smell from childhood, when we'd line up like props for Christmas photos, when my father's smile never reached his eyes. The living room was arranged as though someone expected cameras, armchairs angled perfectly, flowers not quite fresh enough to look spontaneous. Callista sat perched on the edge of the sofa. Her voice was sweet, but her fingers tapped her knee. Desmond stood near the fireplace, pale and stiff. Odessa stared at her phone, thumbs moving fast. And then there was Mrs. Darnell, a family friend and, apparently, an audience. I wondered how much they'd told her. "Lydia," Imelda said brightly, "thank you for coming." I set my bag on the side table. "You said it was urgent." Callista gestured to the armchair opposite her. "Please, sit. We wanted to clear the air." It was an old tactic, dress manipulation up as peace. I took the chair, but didn't lean back. Mrs. Darnell smiled at me, all polite teeth. "It's been such a whirlwind these past few weeks," she said. "But Callista, well, she's been so strong." "The way she's supported you all these years, Lydia, it's admirable." The words landed like a slap, but I kept my face neutral. "I'm sorry," I said, turning slowly toward her. "What exactly did she support?" A thin line appeared between Callista's brows. "Mrs. Darnell just means—" "No," I said softly. "Let her answer." Silence rippled through the room. Desmond shifted his weight. Odessa's thumbs froze above her phone. Mrs. Darnell blinked. "Well, I was told Callista has been financing a lot of the family's needs. School, travel, the big milestones. It's remarkable, really." Callista opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. "You mean this?" I pressed play. Desmond's voice filled the room, tinny but clear. "I know Lydia paid for all of it, but Callista needs the credit right now. It's good for her image. She'll make it up to her later." Mrs. Darnell's mouth fell open. Imelda made a small, choked sound. I let the recording finish, then set the phone down on the coffee table. "That's from a week before Odessa's tuition was cut off," I said. "It's one of several." Callista's face went pale. "You recorded us?" I smiled faintly. "I documented what was mine. That's all." The air shifted. The living room that had been arranged like a stage now felt like a courtroom. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on trial. Imelda cleared her throat. "Lydia, this isn't about fairness," I said. "Because you're right. It isn't. It's about truth." I reached into my bag again and took out the envelope, plain white, sealed. "This," I said, "is the last check you'll ever cash in my name." I handed it to her. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were shredded copies of old bank transfers, statements, and receipts. Years of quiet giving, all in pieces. On top was a single, pristine check. Imelda's hands trembled. "What is this?" "It's the final invoice," I said. "Everything I've ever done, every dollar, every mile, paid in full. My debt is cleared, but yours—" I met Callista's eyes. "Yours is just beginning." Callista's composure cracked. "You're making a scene," she hissed. "No," I said, standing. "I'm ending one." Odessa's eyes filled with tears. She looked from her mother to me and back again. "Aunt Lydia." But I didn't look at her. I didn't look at any of them. I placed my glass of water on the table, exactly where a coaster waited, and smoothed my dress. I was never angry, I said quietly. I was just done. Mrs. Darnell shifted in her seat. Maybe we should... But I was already moving toward the door. The carpet felt different under my shoes now, as though I'd crossed an invisible border. Behind me, voices rose, Callista's sharp, Desmond's defensive, Imelda's pleading, Odessa's soft crying. None of it stopped me. I opened the door. The late afternoon sun fell across the threshold, warm and blinding. The door didn't slam this time. It closed quietly, like a chapter I'd waited too long to end. 2 weeks passed without incident. No phone calls, no visits, no passive-aggressive text messages from Imelda reminding me that family is all we've got. Just quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that presses in on you. It was the kind that breathes, the kind that fills a room gently, like light seeping through sheer curtains at dawn. My condo held that kind of stillness now. That morning, I woke before my alarm. No dreams, just an easy awareness of daylight beginning to touch the walls. The kitchen window spilled soft sunlight across the countertop, warming the empty coffee mug I'd forgotten to put away last night. It was peaceful and real. I moved slowly through my routine, made toast, brewed a strong cup of coffee, fed the small plant in the window that had managed to survive my neglect. On the shelf near the desk, where my files and notebooks lived, sat the broken iPhone. I'd placed it in a clear glass display box, one of those cheap shadow boxes from a craft store. A quiet monument, a reminder not of the destruction, but of the shift. Its screen was still cracked, spidering outward from the impact like frozen lightning. I hadn't replaced it, not because I couldn't afford to, but because I didn't want to forget. That break had started something. My journal sat open beside it. A half-written thought from the night before stared up at me in ink. Sometimes, to be whole, you have to let the broken things stay broken. It didn't need another sentence. I left it as it was and picked up the envelope resting beneath it. An unopened letter from Odessa's school. The return address told me all I needed to know. I tore it gently along the top and pulled the sheet out. It was a confirmation. Her tuition account had been reassigned. I wasn't listed anywhere. No balance owed. No thank you either. Just silence. I smiled. Later that afternoon, I checked my usual community board online. It was a private neighborhood group full of polite, curious strangers who liked to share updates on potholes, bake sales, and HOA politics. Someone had posted a vague comment. Does anyone know what happened with the last name family? Heard something about school payments and a resignation. A few others chimed in. Thought I saw Desmond's name removed from the board list. Didn't Callista say she paid for everything herself? She's been real quiet lately. I didn't comment. I didn't like anything. I simply logged off, closed the laptop, and made another cup of coffee. By then, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long lines of gold and rust-colored light through the trees. Bellevue looked softer in autumn, like the city itself had loosened its shoulders. I put on a sweater, grabbed my bag, and walked out the door. Downtown wasn't far. I passed the same bookstore I used to meet Dad at for coffee on Saturdays, the same bakery where Callista once picked a fight over which cake to serve at Odessa's 4th birthday. The sidewalks were quieter now, leaves tumbling across them in small spirals. That night, I went to a dinner party, just 4 of us. No camera-ready table settings, no curated playlists, just soup, bread, and a few people who asked how I was and actually listened when I answered. Someone, an acquaintance of a friend, looked at me across the table and asked, "Do you have any siblings?" I set my glass down gently. "Once," I said, but I gave them back. There was a beat of surprise, then laughter. Not cruel, not mocking. The kind of laughter that carries release instead of ridicule. It felt good. It felt earned. After dinner, as the evening wound down, I walked home under the streetlights. The air was crisp, and the city hummed with quiet energy. I thought of the family gatherings that had once filled my calendar like a chore list. Birthdays, holidays, forced brunches where my name was always the last to be mentioned, if at all. Now, my schedule was my own. My space was my own. And most importantly, my voice was my own. When I returned to the condo, I changed into pajamas, turned down the lights, and pulled open the drawer where I kept the envelope, the one I'd handed Imelda weeks ago, now empty. I took out a piece of stationery and began to write. Not for anyone else, just for me. Dear younger me, you were never invisible, they just refused to see you. You gave more than they could hold. That wasn't your flaw, it was their limitation. They couldn't meet your loyalty with honesty. That's not your shame to carry. You were enough the whole time. And now, you're free. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then I labeled the flap in small, neat handwriting. Unsent, but understood. I tucked it into my drawer behind the journal. The condo was quiet again. Not the aching quiet of exclusion. Not the buzzing silence of resentment. Just peace. I didn't win by breaking them. I won by refusing to be broken. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to scream or fight, it's to walk away with your dignity intact. Lydia's story reminds us that silence isn't weakness when it comes from strength. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family? The giver no one thanks until you stop giving. Share your story in the comments. We read every one. And if you found a piece of yourself in this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More powerful real-life revenge stories are coming your way.